All right, this should be a quick one. The story that comes right after The Floor Above, which I did a reading of last week, is called Penelope. And this story is I think an example of one of the greatest missed opportunities in short stories, in weird tales that I've seen so far. There are a lot of stories in weird tales that are just kind of like meh, or they're like, it's someone making a crime story and trying to fit it into weird tales a bit. But this one has a lot of elements of a good weird story, but then completely fails to deliver on what you get in the end. So we get a lot of these important elements, right? We get a talkative, eccentric, intelligent character. Quote, had he cared to do so, he might have strung a kite tail of alphabetic degrees after his name years ago. But he scorns such trappings. Orthodox science, of course, will have none of him. He knows too much. End quote. We get a strange astrological prophecy. Quote, my father discovered the star Penelope, and, as if a strange prenatal influence thus had been brought to bear upon his parenthood, it was my natal star. The circumstance was sufficient to enlist his whole interest after my birth in the star Penelope. He'd calculated that its orbit was so vast that 50 years would be required to complete it. I was with my father when he died, and his last words to me were, beware of Penelope when in perihelion. End quote. And of course, we also get the detail that this character's father died in an asylum. So that's another great detail for a weird story. We get a furtively told story by this character. Quote, I have never told you of my connection with the star Penelope. There are few that know. Those whom I have told have looked upon me as mad. If I have concealed from you this, my strangest adventure, you must believe that it was because I valued your opinion of my sanity. Tonight, come, he commanded. Come into the house. I feel that I must tell you tonight. End quote. We get a bizarre physical phenomenon. End quote. Or, not end quote. Quote. It was midnight, and Penelope was in perihelion. The influence of my natal star had overcome the pitiful attraction of the earth, and I had been released from the earth's influence. I was now held by the gravity of the star Penelope. The earth remained as it had been. The house was not upside down, only I. End quote. We get a tense 20 minutes as his landlord looks for him while carrying a revolver. Quote, then a candle flickered around the bend, and my landlord came into view, walking head downward, like the rest of the world. In his hand he grasped what, as he came nearer, I made out to be a revolver. Apparently he had heard the strange noises from my part of the house, and was intent on inquiring their meaning. I trembled, for I knew that if he caught sight of me upside down, as he would think, against the ceiling, he would instantly shoot me, supposing he did not faint from fright. But he did not see me, and after prowling about for 20 minutes, he went away. End quote. And then we get an acrobatic exit. This guy is upside down in his house, and he finds a way to climb out. He goes to the rear of the house where there's a fire escape. Quote, I dared not look down as I climbed through the aperture, but once I had seized the ironwork of the fire escape, I felt more at ease. Then carefully I began my strange upward climb toward the overhanging street. End quote. As you can see, this story is well written. It has kind of good style. It's not too wordy or it's not trying to put on airs in any way. In fact, before you get to the story, Weird Tales itself calls the story a, quote, grotesque, fantastic tale, end quote. But all that happens is that he climbs down to the street, or up to the street, whichever you prefer. He clambers along an iron fence. He scares a woman and talks to her for a second, and her name turns out to be Penelope. And then he climbs back into the house, and he goes to sleep, and he wakes up, and everything's back to normal again. Later on, he tracks this woman down, and eventually they get married. In fact, well, I'll get to it in a minute. So, like, I'm trying to figure out whether this was just like a failed story, or like whether this was like really funny in the 1920s when it was published, and like it's just like a dated humor thing that I'm not quite following, or like if there's something in the story that I'm missing, maybe, but it's just funny to me that with all these elements of a good story, none of them are actually developed in any way that's particularly interesting. And then we have this massive anticlimax at the end, which just feels like wasted opportunity. There are a bunch of other issues if you start thinking about the story in a little bit more detail. For instance, suddenly, he says that it's midnight, and then suddenly there's like a lot of pedestrians out for midnight, including Penelope, and what's she doing out walking around in the middle of the night? But then he says the pedestrian's thin, and that there's fewer of them, not none, but fewer of them on his side of the street, and yet nobody sees him walking around like this, and nobody points or notices. It's very strange. There's this implication for other natal stars, right? A natal star, according to the definition I was able to look, is a celestial body that is present, right, when you're born. And so, what does this mean? Does this mean that he was born when Penelope was in perihelion? In which case, was he born and then fly up to the ceiling, or what? I don't even know. It's kind of weird. Does this have any implication to people with other natal stars, right? Why is it only him and only Penelope that has had this particular problem? It's also kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. It has no real effect on him except that he meets the woman that will eventually become his wife. As long as he doesn't live more than approximately 100 years, he won't ever experience this again. And the joke is made that maybe he was drunk and this was just a drunken fantasy of his. It's also worth noting that, either he was born and it was his natal star, but it wasn't in perihelion while he was born. So how else would you define a natal star than something closest to Earth or whatever? I don't know. Or he got married when he was 50. And there's also a weird time thing where, he tells his story and, he has the event happen and then he spends a bunch of time looking for that woman again, only to find that she lives 3 doors away. And then, there's court, he basically says, oh, I finally met her and then we talked some more and then we decided to get married and we're going to get married next week. And so, he's telling this story, not that much longer after it actually happened, and then the main character to whom he's telling the story is what's his name, Haskell, something like that. He's like, yeah, and that's, and then he refers to Penelope with the other character's last name. There's a little bit of time finagling there that I don't quite understand. And then it's just kind of funny, right? It's like he has this one upside down night in his whole life, and all it does is it helps him meet his future wife. Okay, is that supposed to, make me laugh? I don't understand how it is grotesque or fantastic in any significant way either. It's actually not that crazy at all. I mean, it's weird. It's not weird. It's not even weird. It's just like, this funny thing happened to me one night, and all it did was help me find my wife. What? What? I don't know. Anyway, it turns out that Vincent Starrett is the pen name of the guy who wrote this book. It's it's one of his middle names and his last name, so he used that as his pen name. And he was actually a prolific writer. He wrote a lot for the pulps, and he actually corresponded with H.P. Lovecraft, including writing a poem about Lovecraft that was published in 1949. So, apparently he's a pretty famous author. Apparently Penelope is one of his early published works, and, I guess he kept going, and he must have gotten better, because his other stuff is pretty well regarded as far as I can tell. Anyway, this is The Missed Opportunity of Penelope by Vincent Starrett, and I hope you enjoyed this short video. I will put links in the description to where you can go read this story for yourself if you feel like it. And yeah, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. I think my next thing will be a review of Krondor the Assassins. So hopefully I'll get that recorded in the next day or so. Anyway, have a good one. See y'all later.